I'm NBC 15 Chief Meteorologist Alan Sealls talking about winter weather and winter hazards. Winter can be fun if you're dressed properly and if you're able to stay warm, but winter does bring hazards of ice, cold, and snow, and sometimes combinations that can be dangerous and deadly. Start with the basics though. Winter for the northern hemisphere is when the Earth's axis is tilted away from the sun. It means the sun's rays are low, the days are short, so we don't get a lot of sunlight during the winter time. That's why we get cold. What's also kind of interesting and confuses some people is that early January is when the Earth is actually closer to the sun than it is in early July, which is called perihelion. But the reason again that winter is cold for the northern hemisphere, it's the short days and the low suns. Now look at that satellite images. You know that's a winter storm, but it has some other names. This is called a nor'easter because it's a low pressure system that moves up the east coast of the United States, and as it does so, the winds blow back in from the northeast. So nor'easter is a nickname for it. It is also called a cyclone, and a cyclone is any storm. It could be a tornado, it could be a hurricane, it could be a winter storm, but any low pressure system that spins. And it is also, it's sometimes called a bomb cyclone. Now bomb is a nickname, which means as it develops, it loses pressure very fast and becomes very powerful. Either way, that's sort of the vision that many people have of a winter storm, but it doesn't take a powerful cyclone to produce winter hazards. You know that if you've ever driven on snow, you know it's pretty dangerous. It takes a lot of training and safety in a vehicle that is ready to go. It's all about not accelerating too fast, making sure you're not trying to turn too fast, and leaving a lot of extra space between you and the other vehicles, and being really careful when you get to intersections because some drivers are not that careful. Basic weather terms that we talk about in winter: freeze and frost. Now, you can have a freeze without frost, and you can have frost without a freeze. And those are two important things for agriculture because some plants are very sensitive to temperatures going below 32 degrees, which is when water freezes, and other plants are very sensitive to ice crystals forming on them. So those are two different things that we notice, especially going into winter. What we really notice though is that thing called the wind chill, and wind chill is basically when the wind robs your body of heat. It blows the heat away from your exposed skin that your body generates. And in the process, it makes your body try to generate more heat, and it's unable to generate enough, so your body temperature starts to go down. That's what wind chill is, and it's why it's so important to protect your skin. Don't leave exposed skin when it's very windy and very cold. Now, pipe freezing is a big issue, especially in parts of the United States where homes are not really built for really cold air. Now, when your pipes may freeze, if they freeze, there are a whole bunch of factors. Basically, how low the temperature goes, how long it's going to be that low, how many days in a row the temperature has been low. But it also depends on how your home is constructed, whether you have a crawl space, whether you are built on a slab, how much insulation you have, and also how old your home is. All of those make a big difference. So take a modest home here, and this home, of course, is out in a place where the temperature is down to 20 degrees. 20 degrees, and we have to be concerned about pipes when the temperature gets that low, at least on the Gulf Coast, because when water freezes, it expands, and if it expands in your pipes, they can burst. So think about this: cold air, if your pipes are not insulated well, they can freeze, they can burst, very expensive issue, and it's all about how cold it is outside. And again, if you have a crawl space, and remember, big difference between a PVC pipe and an iron pipe and a copper pipe. All of that could be a threat to your home, and these are things you need to take care of before you get into the heart of the winter season. It's all about preventing the pipes to burst. Best way to do that? Insulate your pipes without a doubt. Make sure they are insulated well. And on those really cold nights, a simple thing you can do if you're concerned about the plumbing inside your house is don't turn the thermostat down, let the heat stay up, and open the cabinet doors where the plumbing is to allow the warm air to circulate near the pipe. So that will help you just a little bit. Now, of course, many people for their outside hose spigot, they'll let the water drip. That's another way to try to prevent the water from freezing and expanding in the plumbing. And whether that's your sink spigot or your outdoor spigot, either way, as long as the water is moving steadily through the pipes, that's one way to to keep things from freezing. Now, of course, you'll waste water that way, so you want to insulate your pipes. Here's the worst case situation you find in winter. It's what's called an ice storm. And that's when ice forms on power lines, on trees, on roadways, and the weight of ice, consider it, it's water, but if you freeze it, it's really heavy, and that will weigh down power lines and power can go out. When you lose power and it's extremely cold, that is a dangerous, if not deadly, scenario. So let's talk about rain, freezing rain, and all those different types of rain. You may not think about this, but anywhere on Earth, if you go up about, say, 4 or 5 miles, the temperature is below freezing, even in the summer. So in the wintertime, that freezing level comes down closer to the ground. So along the Gulf Coast in winter, which we don't see too many freezes right on the Gulf, we start off with liquid precipitation, that is ice in the form of ice, crystals in the clouds above the ground. When it falls into the warmer, relatively warmer air, and we're talking 50 degrees, 40 degrees, even 35 degrees, it melts into rain and it hits the ground. That's just rain. Most people know what rain is. And most people know what snow is. It's when you have ice crystals starting way up high in the sky, and the temperature in the air all the way to the ground is basically below freezing. It could actually be a little above freezing at the ground, but it means the ice is not going to melt. It hits the ground as ice crystals or snowflakes. Now here's where things get tricky. You can have freezing air, say 4 or 5 miles above the ground. A mile up, you may have temperatures above freezing. And then closer to the ground, the air is freezing. So the atmosphere is like a layer cake, and the different layers can be different temperatures. So here's a case where something starts as ice, as snow, it melts into water. Before it hits the ground, it refreezes, and that's what we call sleet. And sleet is little pellets. You'll hear it tapping on the ground, tapping on your vehicle. But the worst scenario is back to that ice storm. It is the scenario where you have something that starts off frozen. It falls through a long, large area of temperatures above freezing, so it melts back to liquid water. But if the ground is frozen, if the ground is 32 degrees or colder, it freezes on contact. Same thing for trees or power lines. That's what's known as an ice storm. It's also known as glaze. And on a roadway, if you're driving and you can't see it, it's called black ice, because you can't see it. And most roadways, or at least asphalt roadways, are black. So that's one of the most dangerous situations you can encounter in the winter, and it could happen even after the rain is done, which makes it even worse. Bridges and overpasses are most susceptible. It could happen when you have snow that melts and leaves a little glaze of ice that develops overnight, refreezes. It can happen while you have light rain falling, or drizzle, or mist, or sleet. It could even happen when you have fog. So there is something called freezing fog. And all of those lead to the scenario of black ice. Bridges, overpasses are the worst place to be when it's really cold and wet, because the bridge has no ground beneath it to insulate it. So when the temperature falls, the bridges will get colder before the earth does, and that's why you run into that situation of black ice. You've seen that sign that says bridge freezes before roadway. That's exactly what it means. So freezing rain, here's the driving tip. Don't. It's as simple as that. You really cannot drive on ice or glaze or freezing rain. Now, you may hit patches of it. Most important thing is, if you hit patches of it and you feel your vehicle going out of control, don't slam on the brakes. Don't suddenly try to turn the wheel, because you can't. It's just like ice skating. You're always going to go forward. So any maneuver you make has to be gentle and slow. And just like when you accelerate and decelerate, it has to be a gentle process. Now, different parts of the country also experience other sorts of winter weather. For example, the Great Lakes of the United States, well known for what's called lake effect snow. And you can get lake effect snow with high pressure and a sunny day. It starts with the fact that the general wind direction is from northwest to southeast across the Great Lakes in the wintertime. And if you take, for example, let's say this is Lake Michigan and this is Wisconsin on the left side, Michigan on the right side. In the winter, if the lake is not frozen, it's relatively warm compared to the air, which could be in the 20s and the teens. It could be single digits. So that warm water will evaporate into that cold air. So that's the first step. You're taking moisture from the lake, it evaporates into the warm air, and based on that prevailing wind direction, once you start to get clouds, those clouds eventually, they become saturated and they produce snow falling over the lake. And go back to that northwest wind. What it does is it pushes those clouds with the snow onshore downwind. And that's called lake effect snow. It could develop fast, typically in small bands right along the lakeshore. Here's something else that happens in cold climates where you have rivers with ice in the rivers. When the ice thaws a bit and breaks up and then refreezes, it can dam the river, create a dam, and then the river spreads out and creates flooding. So that's called an ice jam. All different parts of the United States have different sorts of winter weather hazards. Know the terminology. For example, a weather advisory, doesn't matter whether it's a travel advisory, a snow advisory, a lake effect snow advisory, it means the weather will be inconvenient. It's likely. The ingredients are going to be in place. So that's what an advisory means, be advised for a nuisance. But on the other hand, you can look at something like a watch, a winter storm watch. That means that sort of weather is possible, the ingredients are in place, but it's a different level than an advisory. An advisory is for a nuisance. A watch is for a hazard. A hazard is something that could really do harm to you or your property. And if you get a winter storm warning or an ice storm warning, it means that those threats are likely or certain or happening, that it's already been detected. And again, those are hazards and threats to you. So that's just a summary of various winter hazards that you might find yourself faced with. It's all about being prepared. Dress to be warm. Don't just be fashionable. You've got to be functional. Mittens, gloves, hats, layers of clothing that are water resistant to keep you dry. Be safe. I'm NBC 15 Chief Meteorologist Alan Sealls.